so my new nonfiction that I've been doing is I did a national study on social media and college students. So how social media is affecting their sense of self, so their identity, how they make their way in the world, so how they're meaning making, and then how they conduct their relationships. And so I talked to all these people, and it was really I love doing interviews. Kind of like what you're doing. So I love sitting down and talking to people and hearing what they say. And so that's what the nonfiction book is about. And then my fiction trilogy, my YA fiction trilogy, which is coming out with Harper, or starting to come out with Harper in the spring, is all about technology. And it's about a girl who unplugs. So it's about it, like people have plugged in and they're living in a virtual reality. It's about a girl who unplugs from it and lives in the real world for the first time as a teenager. And so she's experiencing everything that's going on and seeing what's happened to the real world because everybody's leaving it to live virtually. And all the sort of repercussions of that, like on an ethical level, so anyway, it has to do with technology and how it's affecting our lives and our sense of the body and our sense of like what's meaningful and what's not, and so it dovetails nicely with my nonfiction. But that means that when Harper asks me to do things for the book, I can respond with my study. So.
Do you have any like preliminary conclusions that you would share about what you think about young people and social media or technology?
Well, I would say that we tend to only hear the extreme stories in the media. And there are lots of young adults who are totally well-adjusted on social media, so we don't hear that because that's not exciting. But I would say that the biggest surprise for me when I did all this research, regardless of what kind of university students were at or their ethnicity, gender, class, something that just went across all particularities, was I heard over and over again the importance of appearing happy at all times online. So students, by the time they get to college, know that they are being watched and that every little thing they do online could cost them their future. And they have a very acute sense of that. And so there's their online me. They talk about, I was just writing about this, they have the 3 C's I heard a lot, which is cultivate, curate, and what was it? Cultivate, curate. I can't remember the third one. But basically they're crafting. They're crafting, cultivating, and curating. Those words came out of their mouths a lot, like crafting posts, curating their pages and their profiles, and ideally they want to appear happy. And so the pressure to appear happy and even inspiring was really pronounced from all the students, which I thought was interesting and exhausting.
I wonder if that's new. I mean, if it's directly related to technology or social media, or if that's maybe always been the case.
I was just writing about this. I don't think it is new because, so for example, you know, if you just meet someone, or, you know, there's certain things you keep private. So there's certain things that we keep private. That's totally normal. But students are online so constantly. Like, one of the things I talk about is the real me versus the online me. And sometimes they feel like the real me gets short shrift compared to the online me, because they feel like they have to maintain it. So they're on it all the time, and they're constantly checking, and they're constantly lurking. And so much of who they are and how they spend their time has to do with being online and maintaining all these profiles. And so they are spending a large part of their lives, you know, keeping up a certain appearance that they don't feel like is true or really them. So I think so one of the things that social media has changed, I think, is that, you know, it's the 24/7 news cycle of me. And I have to really curate that news cycle 24/7. And so the idea that you would be constantly worrying about that, I think, is new.
It's interesting to think about, what do you say, crafting, cultivating, and curating.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are all things that I associate with writing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and this idea of virtual reality is somehow a non-reality, where it's like, I mean, it seems like in the realm of literature, these things are not so crazy or scary or.
But imagine if, I mean, this is about doing it for yourself. Like, so you're crafting, cultivating, and curating an online persona, and you're doing it all the time. And if you think about, I actually had this one student who talked about how getting a ton of likes on a particular post or a photo is like being a bestseller for a moment. He said that. It's like getting to be a bestseller, but just for a moment. And so, you know, he was thinking about it. So the students I talked to think about, like, I mean, I have a whole chapter on likes, like the likes and retweets. But if you think about the process of writing, it's exhausting. You know, you get for me, I get the first draft, which is the most exhilarating draft always, because nothing matters. Like, you can write an extra 100 pages that don't need to be there just because you needed to, or you need to figure something out, and then you can cut them all away. And because then you spend all this time revising and curating it, you know, crafting this novel before the public sees it. But this is just a constant putting out content that you are trying to edit, you know, for public viewing, you know, nearly every day. And a lot of the students I spoke with talked about how a lot of them rarely post because it's so exhausting. It takes them so long to think of what they want to say, and they get so worried about how to word it that they spend hours like sitting there, and then it's really they don't like to post because it's so high stakes, and or it's just so public. But they talk about how much time they spend doing this. So, but they're all personal things that, you know, that people are putting out there. So I don't know if also that's why I don't do that myself so much, because I spend all this time, you know, writing the story, and it is exhausting to get something ready for the public, I think, for public viewing. And I like doing it in private before it comes out. In some ways, my least favorite part is the part when it's published, because other people can see it and judge it, and like, I don't need that. And I do enjoy, so I've had a lot of, my nonfiction has had, you know, a lot of people teach it, and I get invited to all these lectures, and I do love that. Like, I love the fact that something I put out there allows me to be in conversation with real people, and there's something so fun about that. Like, I love that part of publishing a book. I feel like that's the, you know, the publicity is the hard part, because I don't like that, but then I know that I'm working toward being a part of this other conversation. It comes after all this part that's hard. But so I think for social media, for example, you get the sort of intense immediacy of people responding to what you're doing, but then, you know, you have to keep doing this all the time, and I think it's hard to keep it up. So
I remember when I was teaching undergraduates, but one of my students had said, I forget the context, but he had said that, like, the most important thing, but like the most exciting thing that had happened to him that he was most proud of was that Lady Gaga had retweeted. Like, it had never occurred to me
that would be the high point.
It had never occurred to me that there were young and vibrant and interesting kids, because I think it's basically the majority. whatever their problems are. But that they would be spending all this time either crafting their appearance or crafting their personality to get certain kind of like celebrity recognition, or this sort of like weird instant fame that then goes as soon as it comes. I like 15 seconds of fame now instead of 15 minutes. It seems like
I mean, there's something to me very contained about fiction and nonfiction, I guess, or what I write as a kind of like as output of myself. Like I feel like I write something and then it's out there. It has to do with me because I've written it. Some things have more to do with me than others, depending on where they're coming from. But there is something that feels there. I think there is a kind of safe distance if something goes into a book, or as opposed to something that is attached to this very personal thing that you're doing all the time. And so for me, I feel like it's hard enough to have stuff out there that have to do with me that people can, sort of do what they want with. And not everybody is made that way, I think, to be handling that kind of feedback or that kind of being on all the time. That was very clear in the interviews that I did. Some students are really good at it and they love it, and some people really just wish they didn't have to do it. So, but I don't know if it's making them become better writers. We're definitely editing ourselves. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the upside of all of this is that social media is letting or forcing us in some ways to be more creative in a sense of like what, maybe not sort of like a freedom of creation, like playfulness or imagination. A little bit of that though. I mean, this student who said, his crowning achievement was getting retweeted by Lady Gaga, I was like, I want to see that tweet. I want to know what, because to me, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, you're writing these papers that, you know what I mean? It's hard to see in a more formal structure, but like, what could he have said that was sort of like weird enough?
The Lady Gaga.
Or creative enough to sort of elicit this person who has a lot of fame, who I think is probably incredibly creative herself.
Though I think that the silliness, there is a lot of silliness and creativity and just ridiculousness going on that I think college students have a lot of fun with, but they've learned to do it anonymously. So they talked about anything anonymous or like disappearing, like Snapchat, even though we all know we can take a screenshot, is really, that's like their favorite thing because it's not attached to their names, their real names. And so they don't really feel like they can be themselves unless it's not attached to their name. And that makes me sad. But I definitely live in a different way than the students that I speak with, who are mostly on social media all the time. So.
What do you think was formational for you in terms of being a writer then, or to sort of create and cultivate your profession, your obsession, or I don't know how you consider yourself, like as a writer?
Yeah, I always end up on these panels with people who are like, I knew I want to be a writer when I was 5. And I'm like, I don't think I published my first book until I was 29. And it was an accident that I did. It was just because I gave a talk. It was a nonfiction book, and I gave a talk, and there was a publisher in the audience. And she was like, you should write a book. And I was like, okay. And then she turned out to be a publisher, and she was serious. And so that's how I started writing. And I had no plans of being a writer, and it took me like 6 books. I think I published like 6 books before I actually called myself one. And it was mostly because my friends were calling me one, and I was like, I'm not a writer. But I think for me, I've always been a huge reader. Since I was a little kid, like crazy, always reading. And then once I got to high school, I figured out I loved ideas and I'm an ideas person, and when I got to college, that's all I wanted to do was like, I was a philosophy major, and I just felt so driven to figure out the world and like being with a capital B and all that geeky stuff, which is why I went to grad school. And so for me, it's always questions that drive me. That's the thing that, like, questions and ideas, like, why are we here? What does it mean to be a person? How do we figure this thing out? Like, life. And so for me, a lot of both my nonfiction and fiction is about figuring out life, and there's different spheres to do that. Yes, I was a philosophy major.
Did you have a particular branch of philosophy, like a philosopher that really? They're like the closest that I can get to understanding. They're right up.
Yeah, I liked contemporary philosophy, like the existentialists. So, because me and the abyss were like this. It's true. Everybody's made differently. I have an intimate relationship with existential angst. So, but I'm always trying to figure out the world. Like, I definitely I was that kid. So, like, now it's embarrassing. I always get like a smirk on my face when my students are obsessed with Ayn Rand, but I was obsessed with Ayn Rand in high school. I went through that phase because I was trying to understand like identity and like the human person and authenticity. But when I went to college, I just started recognizing things or questions I had about the world in my philosophy classes that I had to take when I was a first year student. And then my favorite people to study were people like Hegel and Heidegger, who whenever I say I loved Heidegger, now people are like, Heidegger the Nazi, and at the time no one was talking about him as a Nazi, so that came later, but even though I'm sure everyone knew, this was pre-internet, but I loved Heidegger because when I always think of Heidegger as a kind of poet, because his ideas were so big. Like, he was grasping at being, like, literally, like, what does it mean to be capital B, like being with a capital B. So he was grasping at something so big and so beyond language that he had to create a new language to capture it. And so Heidegger made up new words to try to get at the concepts he was trying to describe. And so one of the things I loved about reading Heidegger was you had to learn his language in order to read him. And then once you did, it was like magical. And it's almost like math. Like, philosophy's a little bit like math. It's like figuring things out. And so Heidegger was really hard work, but I loved figuring him out because it was really worth it once I did. Like, my mind was firing and very exciting. So I sound like, sometimes I forget how much I love being a philosophy geek. Like, I'll go back and I'll read some of this, what looks to be really dry stuff, but the ideas are so big and exciting to me, it doesn't feel dry.
Are there any writers that you think embody that?
Oh.
Or that are, like, philosophical in a way that...
Yeah. My favorite of all is Philip Pullman. And he writes, I guess his books are for children, but they're for everybody. But he wrote the trilogy, his Dark Materials, which will soon not just be a trilogy, which I'm excited about. But one of the reasons why I totally fell in love with those books is because, it's wonderful writing. It's this adventure story, but the ideas are so big. Like, he's dealing with the biggest ideas around, like, what is God? What does it mean to be a person? Is there such a thing as a soul? If there is such a thing as a soul, what does it look like? And he's dealing with just like, what is the substance of our existence, and does it have any meaning whatsoever? Like, or is it meaningless? So he's dealing with like the biggest questions all the philosophers deal with. So that's why I love him. He's got a big mind. He's got an exciting mind, I think, and he just happens to use it for fiction. I actually think some of the best places. I do think some of the best places to play around with ideas today is in fiction, because you're not beholden to anybody else. Like, you can just you can go wherever you want, whereas in nonfiction, you have to cite every person who's ever come before you. So...
It seems maybe more political to be working in the nonfiction realm, do you think? Even if you're talking about philosophy?
One of the things I think is so sad about the sort of intellectual enterprise of writing philosophy and theology and all that today is that I think most people spend all their time citing everybody else. And, you know, back in the day of like a Hegel or, you know, even like Derrida, before we had all knowledge at our fingertips, we had communities we were working in. So like Hegel has his conversation partners that he owes, and you can see them, you know, in his writing. But mostly, like, the task was to like sit down and work out why we were here. You know, that was where his obligation was. And so I'm not sure that's we don't really have space to do that anymore, I think. At least for nonfiction. We have to spend all of our time citing and proving that we know that everybody else has said X, Y, and Z. And so I think that takes up most of our energy. So we don't necessarily, like, I do wonder, are we ever going to have another Derrida? Because are we ever going to just let somebody play around with ideas like that? Or is that person going to have to spend all their time just citing and citing? So I think in fiction, we don't expect that. So in fiction, you have this total play space to do whatever you want. So, of course, then you can end up with, like, 100-page Ayn Rand section in a book where she's just like vomiting a speech about her ideas, and that's not the best place for it, I think. She should have just done that in nonfiction space. I think I was thinking about how sometimes I think about what is it that makes us read, like what is it that we're attracted to when we're reading, and I feel like often we read to find ourselves like represented in different stories, or that's part of what's one of the things that's exciting if something resonates with us or if we can relate to the person. But also we read to discover things that aren't at all like ourselves, and so the sort of newness or the weirdness of the different things in the world, the otherness of the world is also part of, you know, what's driving us. I guess I was thinking about that because I was thinking about writing fiction and then nonfiction and then philosophy, and like how are those things connected, or what is it that's so exciting about because for me reading philosophy it's almost like reading fiction. Well, it's like you have to, or like fantasy in the sense that you have to be willing to embody this world of ideas that are often really weird and like hard to understand, and you have to sort of go there and be willing to like be in the strange language and all of that, and that's sort of what fantasy is like a little bit. So, but there's something, I always feel like there's something really exciting about that challenge of the strangeness of it and what the strangeness can tell you about who we are and what things mean and what it can tell you about yourself.
I find that like with every new book that I read, right? It's sort of the beginning where you're getting, even if it's a completely realistic world, right? Like getting into somebody else's head or somebody else's experience via this book or this world. Getting used to it, like I find that the most exciting thing. When I get to decide as the reader whether or not I want to actually go on that sort of journey, that place with those people.
There's that, but I know for me also, someone who's intimately acquainted with the abyss and just like our total utter isolation in the world, that there's something so reassuring about picking up a book by someone else and seeing yourself represented there, because then you know you're not alone. Like there's someone else who has like thought those things, and I do think that that's one of the reasons that draws me to read, is the remembering that I'm not alone, like that reassurance, because I need that, I guess. I shouldn't say these things on camera. It's too revealing.
Do you think closer to like figuring out anything? Like, or that you have a better grasp of, like, okay, like I know that I believe this at this moment in time about God or about His soul or about like the matter with which we're composed and why this all needs to happen.
I don't know. I don't know that it's. I think if anything, the more I do this stuff, or the more that I spend all this time with all these ideas, I just feel like, wow, everything is so complicated and hard. And like life just gets harder and more complicated. And so I don't know that I've figured out anything else other than that. But I do know that I still think trying to, that like sitting down to write some sort of philosophical treatise, like just trying to, like the effort of trying to figure out the world or who we are in it and what does all this mean, is there a God, is there not, like what are we all doing, what is my purpose. I think those are really worthwhile enterprises. Like it's a worthwhile task to do that, and like it's an exciting thing to invest yourself in. And so I don't know, like I like being a part of a world where that's possible. So like if I could write historic materials, which I feel like is I think it's one of my greatest reads ever. I think it's one of the most, like when I sit down and I read Philip Pullman's historic materials, I'm like, how does this man exist? Like, where does his mind come from? Like, who is he? Like I just feel awe that his mind has been able to conjure this, and that he's able to work through such complex things through storytelling. And so I feel excited to know that people do that, and I don't know if I'm capable of doing that, but I like having the space to play around with those possibilities. I think that's really exciting.